The hum of the engines filled the control room as Lyra Cade stood before the massive star map. Her fingers hovered over the console, tracing the projected route to the last refuge, humanity's last sanctuary. Her gaze was focused, but her mind raced. The Vicari were relentless, their armadas tearing through the galaxy at an unstoppable pace. The last few weeks had been a blur of evacuations, battles, and a grim realization: Earth was lost. The fleet of refugee ships, thousands strong, would carry what remained of humanity away from the dying world, but there was no guarantee of survival. The Vicari could strike at any moment. "Captain," came the voice of Commander Jace Torin, Lyra's right-hand officer. He was standing behind her, his tone tense. "We've just received a distress signal from Fleet Delta. They're under attack by Vicari warships in the Kessel sector. They're outnumbered 5-1. Lyra's eyes flickered with concern. Delta Fleet was supposed to be a defensive shield for the Exodus, ensuring that the core ships could escape unscathed. Now it was being torn apart. "How much time do we have?" "Less than an hour before they're overrun," Torin replied. "We need to make a choice. Do we send help, or do we continue with the evacuation?" Lyra's hand clenched into a fist. The weight of command was heavier than ever. She had led her people through countless skirmishes, but this was different. The stakes were higher than they had ever been. She looked at the faces of her crew, their expressions weary yet hopeful. They knew what was at risk. "Send the 3rd Battalion to assist Delta Fleet," she ordered, her voice cold with determination. "We can't afford to lose any more ships. If Delta falls, we'll never make it to the last refuge." The crew sprang into action, relaying her orders across the fleet. Lyra watched the ship's position shift on the map as the fleet made its course adjustment. The war was personal now. Her people, her home, everything she had ever known was on the line. She wasn't about to let it slip away without a fight. But as the hours passed, a sense of dread began to settle over the bridge. The Vicari's reach was far, and they had already infiltrated every quadrant of space. Lyra knew it wouldn't be long before the enemy's shadow loomed over them. She stared at the holo display as the Kessel sector flashed red, indicating the rapidly deteriorating situation. Delta Fleet was running out of time, and so were they. Then it happened. A loud, shrill alarm blared throughout the ship, shattering the tense silence. Torin's voice cut through the noise, panic rising in his tone. "Captain, we've detected an anomaly on the outer rim. Vicari ships. They're closing in on the fleet. There's no way to avoid them." Lyra's heart raced as she glanced at the navigation screen. The fleet was trapped. The Vicari had found them. It was happening faster than anyone could have predicted. "Set a course for Delta Fleet's last known position," she commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Prepare all fighter squadrons. We fight for every second we can buy." As the ship rumbled beneath their feet, Lyra moved toward the bridge's viewport, staring out at the cold emptiness of space. Her chest tightened with the weight of responsibility. There was no retreat, no surrender, only the fight ahead. The Vicari warships, massive and dark like harbingers of doom, appeared on the edge of the screen. Their weapons glowed ominously as they approached, and Lyra could almost feel the cold grip of death creeping closer. Every second counted. And then, as if to confirm the worst of their fears, the fleet's communication system crackled to life with an urgent message from Delta Fleet's commander. "The enemy has infiltrated the ship's core. There's a traitor among us." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving behind a haunting silence. The blood in Lyra's veins turned to ice. There was a saboteur on board. She had known the mission was too important to be left to chance. But now, everything, her entire command, was at risk. The fleet's engines roared as they tore through the black void, pushing the ships toward the last refuge. But Lyra Cade couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, hunted even. The sudden appearance of the Vicari ships at the Kessel sector had been too well-timed, too precise. Whoever had betrayed them knew exactly when and where to strike. The question gnawed at her: who could it be? With every decision she made, she felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. The last refuge, a planet hidden in an uncharted system, had been humanity's last hope for survival. Long ago, before the Vicari had even set their sights on Earth, an ancient alien race had constructed the planet's secret shelter. The refuge was located deep in a system that was thought to be uninhabitable, its location lost to time. Lyra and her crew had spent months hunting for it, knowing that its isolation could provide the security humanity needed. Now, after months of peril, they had finally arrived. But when the fleet's ships descended through the atmosphere of the barren world, Lyra felt a chill in her bones. The planet seemed empty, lifeless. The ground was a dusty gray, with jagged rocks and ancient structures half buried beneath the surface. It felt more like a tomb than a sanctuary. Yet the sensors were clear. The infrastructure of the hidden refuge was intact, hidden deep beneath the surface. Humanity's survival rested on what lay below. "We're setting up base camp at the coordinates," Torrin reported as Lyra stood at the command center of the lead ship. "We'll begin construction of the perimeter walls to make the landing zone safe for the rest of the fleet." Lyra nodded, but even as she issued orders to her crew, she couldn't ignore the sense of unease that lingered. The skies were too still. The wind didn't stir. It was as if the planet itself was holding its breath, waiting. With the fleet settled in, the first few groups began to descend into the heart of the refuge, massive, labyrinthine structures that had been buried for centuries. Lyra led the exploration party into one of the most prominent structures, a long-forgotten bunker buried deep under the planet's crust. It was the perfect place to shelter the survivors, but as they made their way inside, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The walls seemed to hum with an ancient energy, their surface etched with strange symbols that none of them could decipher. "Captain, take a look at this," said Dr. Salara Ishan, the team's lead archaeologist, her voice tinged with awe as she pointed to a large crystalline structure in the center of the room. "This is unlike anything we've seen before. It's alive." The crystal seemed to pulse with an eerie light. It was large, nearly the size of a human, and its edges shimmered in a way that was unnatural. It thrummed softly, as if it were breathing. Lyra stepped closer, feeling an unexplainable pull toward it. She could almost hear whispers in her mind, as if the crystal was calling out to her. "We need to be cautious," Torrin advised, stepping closer. "We don't know what this thing is or what it can do." Lyra gave him a sharp glance but nodded. "Understood, but we need answers. Humanity needs hope, and if this is a key to that hope, we will unlock it." But as her fingers brushed the surface of the crystal, a violent pulse of energy shot through the room, throwing everyone back. The lights flickered as the air around them crackled with static. For a moment, everything went silent. Then a voice, a low, mechanical hum, echoed through the room, as if the crystal itself was speaking to them. "The end is coming. The Vicari are not your only enemy." The words sent a chill down Lyra's spine. She looked at the others, but no one had an explanation. The crystal's warning was clear, but it left more questions than answers. Before she could respond, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the entrance. Someone was approaching. "Captain, we've got a problem," Torrin said urgently. "There's movement in the perimeter. We've got company." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. "Vicari?" she asked. Torrin shook his head. "No, something else. And they're close." The hairs on the back of Lyra's neck stood on end. Whoever, or whatever, was coming, it wasn't just a threat to their survival. It was something far worse, something that might destroy not only the refuge but humanity itself. Lyra's breath quickened as she motioned for the team to take cover. The rumble of distant explosions reverberated through the walls of the ancient bunker, shaking the ground beneath their feet. The unsettling hum of the crystal still echoed in her mind, its cryptic warning hanging in the air like a dark omen. Whoever was approaching wasn't just a force of nature, they were hunting them. "We need to get out of here," Torin muttered, his voice low but urgent. "This place is crawling with them." "Stay sharp," Lyra commanded. "We don't know who, or what, this is. Keep your eyes open." The team moved quickly, slipping through the corridors of the underground complex, their footsteps muffled by the eerie silence that followed the earlier energy surge. Lyra's hand rested on the grip of her sidearm, every sense alert, her instincts screaming that the situation had just gone from dangerous to deadly. The crystal had given them no answers, only more questions. Who were they dealing with? Why had the Vicari's invasion triggered something buried so deep? As they reached the surface, the sound of combat reached their ears. The refuge had been breached again. The outer defenses were holding, but only just. Lyra looked toward the horizon, where plumes of smoke rose into the air. The Vicari had arrived in force, but their warships weren't the only threat. Shadows moved in the distance, twisting shapes that didn't belong to any known species. "This isn't right," Torin said, his voice a whisper. "Those aren't Vicari. Who are they?" Lyra scanned the landscape. The creatures were humanoid, but their features were distorted alien. Some had dark, flowing armor, while others seemed to shimmer in and out of sight, their forms flickering like mirages. It was as though they were between realities, existing in a state of constant flux. But what struck her the most was the overwhelming sense of malevolence they radiated. "They're coming," said Solara, her voice tremulous as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. I've never seen anything like them. They're not from this galaxy. They're too old." "They're from the void," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the rising fear. The words hit her like a revelation. The crystal, the anomaly, the creatures, it all clicked. They're not just a threat to humanity, they're a part of something much bigger. Before anyone could respond, a harsh voice cut through the air, echoing over the comms. It was a human voice, but distorted, garbled with static. "This is Fleet Delta. We've made contact with an unknown faction. They are not friends. We're under attack. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving only silence. Lyra clenched her fists. There was no time to waste. Delta Fleet was in trouble, and from the sounds of it, humanity wasn't the only target. "We have to move now," Lyra ordered, her eyes narrowing as she turned to her crew. "The last refuge is no longer a sanctuary. It's ground zero. We can't let this force take over. Get to the command center and prepare for immediate evacuation." The team sprinted toward the heavily guarded command post, but as they neared the entrance, the lights flickered and went out. A low, guttural growl reverberated from the shadows, sending a chill through Lyra's spine. They weren't alone. "We need a plan," Torin said, his voice grim as he pressed his back against the wall, his weapon raised. But before Lyra could respond, one of the strange, flickering figures appeared in the doorway, a being that seemed to form out of the very air itself. It was humanoid, with dark, swirling energy twisting around its body, its face obscured by a mask of liquid metal. As it stepped forward, the temperature in the room dropped, and the air seemed to crackle with unnatural power. "I am a Southaran, and you are trespassing," the being said, its voice deep and resonant, like the rumble of distant thunder. Lyra's heart hammered in her chest, but she stood tall, refusing to show weakness. "We're not trespassing. We're protecting what's left of humanity, and if you stand in our way, we'll fight for every inch." Zoltharan's form shimmered and shifted, its features blurring like smoke in a breeze. It cocked its head as if amused by her words. "You do not understand," it said softly. "You have no idea what you're up against. The Vicari are pawns, mere tools. The true enemy is much older, and you, humans, are far more dangerous than you know." Lyra's pulse quickened. "What do you want?" Zoltharan's laugh was a hollow, chilling sound. I want what has always been mine, and I will take it from you by force if necessary." The creature's form stretched out, reaching toward Lyra with unnatural speed. But before it could make contact, Torin fired his weapon, striking the creature's arm. The blast seemed to have no effect as the arm simply reformed, the energy shifting around the wound. "Get back," Lyra shouted. "We need to regroup." As the creature advanced, Lyra knew they had no time to waste. Humanity was not just fighting for survival against the Vikari now. They were facing an ancient power that had been waiting for this very moment. And the last refuge, it seemed, was no refuge at all. The room was cold, unnaturally so, as Southern advanced, its form twisting like a shadow, constantly flickering. The faint crackling of energy filled the space as the creature's presence seemed to warp reality around it. Lyra's team, despite their best efforts, was pushed back against the walls, their weapons ineffective against the shimmering figure that loomed before them. "Hold your ground," Lyra barked, her voice cutting through the rising tension. She knew they couldn't afford to let fear dictate their actions. There was no retreat anymore. If they didn't fight, humanity's last hope would be extinguished. Torin stepped forward, aiming his weapon at the creature once again. The shot rang out, but once more, it passed through Zalthirin without leaving a mark. The creature didn't flinch, its masked face unwavering. "You are wasting your time, human," Zalthirin said, its voice calm and knowing, almost as if it were speaking to an inferior child. "I am not your enemy. The true enemy is far older than even your kind can comprehend." Lyra's mind raced as she tried to process the creature's words. What did it mean? The Vikari were one thing, barbaric invaders with an agenda. But now this being, this ancient power, had appeared out of nowhere. It was clear they had underestimated the forces at play in this war. She couldn't afford to be distracted by vague threats. There was something more here, a truth buried beneath the surface. "What do you want?" Lyra demanded, her voice unwavering despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "If you want the refuge, it's not yours to take. This is humanity's last chance." Zalthirin's dark form swirled as it moved closer, and Lyra could almost feel its presence gnawing at her mind, trying to pry open thoughts she wasn't ready to share. "The refuge is not for you, nor any mortal race," it said. "It was never meant to be a sanctuary. You see, human, the refuge was built to conceal something far greater than your species could ever fathom. It is the key to a war that was fought long before your kind existed." A wave of shock passed through Lyra, her heart skipping a beat. "A war? You mean the war between the Vikari and your kind?" Zalthirin's flickering form seemed to pause, almost as if considering how much to reveal. "Yes, but not the war you believe. You're dealing with an ancient conflict, a war that predates the Vikari, predates even your ancestors. We are not just fighting for territory or dominance. We are fighting for survival against something far worse." Lyra exchanged a look with Torin. This was getting worse by the second. Whatever this creature was, its enemies were apparently more terrifying than the Vikari. But could they trust Zalthirin? Was it telling the truth, or was this all some form of manipulation? "We've seen your kind in the shadows, manipulating the Vikari," Torin said, his voice rough with distrust. "What makes you think we'll just sit back and let you take the refuge?" Zalthirin tilted its head, the metallic mask reflecting what little light there was. "I am not here to conquer or destroy. I am here to warn. The Vikari are pawns in a far greater game. They are the lesser threat. The true enemy, the one that has been pulling their strings, is awakening." Lyra felt a chill seep into her bones. What enemy? The creature's voice lowered, as though speaking the name aloud would summon it. "The Voidborn." A cold silence fell over the group, the air heavy with the weight of the words. The Voidborn. Lyra had heard rumors of such creatures, dark entities from the depths of space, older than the stars themselves. But they were thought to be myth, stories told to children to scare them. Now, it seemed, the stories were real. You think the Vicari are the worst we've faced? Altharin continued, its voice like ice. The Voidborn are a force unlike anything you can imagine. They were responsible for the collapse of entire galaxies. They are coming, and your species has unwittingly drawn their attention. The Refuge, hidden as it is, holds the key to keeping them at bay. Lyra's mind reeled as she processed the enormity of what Azaltharin was telling them. The Vicari weren't just invaders. They were a distraction, a tool in a much darker, more ancient war. The Voidborn were coming, and the last Refuge was humanity's only defense against them. But if the Refuge was truly a key, who controlled it, and why had it been hidden for so long? Why should we believe you? Torin challenged, stepping forward. You've been manipulating the Vicari for who knows how long. You're not a friend to humanity. Zaltharin's form flickered more intensely now, its voice sharpening with an edge of cold fury. I have no love for your species, but if you fail to understand what's at stake here, you will not survive long enough to see the end of this war. The Voidborn will consume everything. There will be nothing left. A flash of light lit up the horizon, a streak of flame in the sky. The Vicari ships were descending, but this time, they weren't alone. Something far darker, far more terrifying, was with them. Lyra turned toward the distant sky, her heart pounding. They had no time left. We don't have a choice, do we? She muttered, more to herself than anyone else. No, Azaltharin replied, its voice suddenly filled with grim finality. You never did. The horizon blazed with the fiery descent of the Vicari ships, their massive forms blotting out the sky as they neared the surface. But it was not just the Vicari that Lyra had to worry about now. A darker, more insidious force hovered on the edge of the battlefield, shifting shapes, like shadows taking form from the fabric of space itself. The Voidborn were here. We have to move, Torin urged, his voice tight with urgency. The distant rumble of the descending enemy fleet was deafening now, drowning out everything else. They'll overwhelm us if we don't. Lyra nodded, trying to focus despite the chaos unfolding around them. She knew they had no choice. If they didn't take a stand now, humanity's last hope would be gone. The last Refuge had been designed to withstand invasions, but not from this kind of power. The place was falling apart, its defenses barely holding against the combined assault of the Vicari and the Voidborn. Time was slipping away. We've got a small window before the enemy forces converge on our position, Lyra said, taking charge once again. We're going to the command center. There's a last-ditch plan we can initiate there. If we can activate the Refuge's core systems, we might have a shot at stopping them. Zaltharin, standing apart from them, watched the chaos unfold with an unsettling calm. Activating the core will not be enough, it said, its voice low and laden with gravity. The Voidborn have already breached the perimeter of your defenses. They know of the core, but it is not just the core that matters anymore. It is what you do with it. Lyra turned to face the ancient being, frustration boiling over. What are you talking about? If you know something, tell us now. We don't have time for cryptic warnings. Zaltharin's form flickered again, its presence casting a growing shadow over the team. The core of the Refuge is a weapon, an ancient one. But its power has been dormant, sealed away for millennia. Only those who understand the mechanism can activate it. And you, human, are one of those few. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? I don't know anything about this. Your connection to the Refuge is not accidental, as Altharin said, its voice now tinged with something that could almost be called reverence. The ones who built this place, they knew your kind would rise again. They foresaw the coming of the Voidborn. They created a lineage of humans who would one day unlock the power of this place. You are part of that lineage, Lyra. A deep silence filled the air as Lyra processed the weight of Azaltharin's words. Her mind raced, the fragments of her past that had never made sense suddenly falling into place. the strange connection she'd always felt toward the refuge, the way certain elements of its technology seemed familiar, even though she had never been trained to understand it. All of it was starting to make sense. She had been chosen. But chosen for what? If I'm part of some ancient plan, then why didn't anyone tell me? Lyra demanded, her voice rising. Why did it all fall apart? Why didn't we prepare for this? Because humanity was never meant to inherit this power, as Altherin said, its voice cold, as if it were recounting a painful truth. The refuge was a safeguard against the Voidborn, but it was also a test. Your ancestors failed, and now you were left to pick up the pieces. The weight of those words hung over her like a shroud. Her hands clenched into fists, anger rising within her. This wasn't fair. Humanity had fought tooth and nail for every inch of survival, and now they were learning they were not the first to face this threat. The ancient civilization that had built the refuge had failed, and now it was their turn to try and succeed. We still have a chance, Lyra said, trying to find some shred of hope. We can't give up. Not now. Torin placed a hand on her shoulder. We'll fight, Lyra. We fought to survive this long. We can't let this thing, take everything. Then we'll make our stand, Lyra said, determination hardening in her voice. To the command center. Now, the team moved as one, sprinting toward the massive steel doors of the command center. The air was thick with tension as the storm of destruction raged outside. The ground trembled beneath their feet with every explosion that rocked the perimeter of the refuge, and the distant rumble of the Voidborn's arrival grew louder. Lyra's mind raced as they approached the doors. There was no turning back. They either activated the core and fought for humanity's survival, or they died trying. As they reached the command center, the doors hissed open, revealing a vast chamber filled with ancient technology, alien machinery humming with life. At the center of it all, embedded in a massive stone pedestal, was the core. Lyra could feel the weight of it, an enormous, powerful presence that seemed to pulse with life. She stepped forward, her hand trembling slightly as she placed it on the cool surface of the pedestal. The room lit up, the core activating as if recognizing her touch. A voice, not Adzaltharin's but something much older, boomed in her mind. Welcome, Guardian of the Key. Lyra's heart pounded. The true test was beginning. The core hummed with a power unlike anything Lyra had ever felt before. It resonated deep within her bones, vibrating through her entire being, as if her very essence was sensing with the ancient energy. The voice that echoed in her mind was more than just a communication. It was a presence, an intelligence that had existed far beyond the reach of any human. Guardian of the Key. The words repeated in her mind, pulsing with a strange urgency. She could feel the weight of the title settling on her shoulders, a mantle she had never asked for. But there was no time to question it now. The Vicari and the Voidborn were closing in, and the only thing that stood between them and humanity's extinction was the power that lay within this ancient core. Lyra? Torin's voice broke through the haze of her thoughts. He was standing beside her, his expression tense with concern. What's happening? What is this thing? Lyra turned her head, her gaze locking with his. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She didn't have an answer, not yet. All she knew was that this was their last chance, and it wasn't just about defending the refuge anymore. It was about fighting back against the Voidborn, the ancient terror that had been waiting for this moment. Stay close, she said, forcing her voice to steady. I don't know how this works, but I think we have to activate it. It's the only way we'll stand a chance. The room was bathed in a deep, eerie light as Lyra placed her hand firmly on the core's surface. The energy within the chamber surged, and the walls trembled as ancient mechanisms deep within the refuge began to awaken. Massive doors began to grind open at the far side of the command center, revealing a vast chamber beyond. It was like something out of a dream, a massive vault filled with more strange, alien technology, all dormant until now. Prepare, Guardian. The ritual must begin. The voice in her mind was insistent, demanding her focus. You are the key. Only you can wield the core's power to stop the Voidborn. But understand this, the cost will be great. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. What cost? She whispered, her voice tight with fear. The core requires a vessel, a conduit, to channel its energy. The vessel must be pure, unblemished in spirit and mind. Once the process begins, there is no turning back. The energy will consume you. It will either destroy you or elevate you beyond what you can imagine. The weight of the decision hung over her like a storm cloud, suffocating her every thought. She knew what she had to do. There was no other choice. But the core's promise of elevation or destruction made the stakes all the more dire. Torrens stepped closer, his brow furrowed in confusion and concern. What's it saying, Lyra? What's happening? She couldn't answer him immediately. Her mind was already racing, processing everything the voice had told her. The power to stop the Voidborn was within her grasp, but to wield it, she would have to pay the price, and that price might be her life. I have to do this, Torren, she said, her voice more resolute than she felt. We don't have another option. If we don't act now, everything we've fought for will be lost. Torren's face twisted with a mixture of fear and resolve. But what about you? You'll. I know, she interrupted, cutting him off. But I can't let that stop me. I have to protect humanity. If I don't, there won't be anything left to fight for. There was a long pause as the room seemed to hold its breath. Torren gave a slight nod, his jaw set with grim determination. Then I'm with you, whatever happens. Lyra felt a moment of gratitude toward him, but it was fleeting. The responsibility now weighed entirely on her shoulders. She turned back to the core, taking a deep breath as she prepared herself to begin the ritual. There was no turning back now. The Voidborn were almost here, and the Vicari had already breached the outer defenses. Humanity's fate had already been sealed in many ways, but she still had a chance to change the outcome. With one final, determined breath, she pressed her hand firmly into the glowing surface of the core. The energy surged, overwhelming her senses, as tendrils of light shot out, wrapping around her body. The room around her seemed to dissolve as she was pulled into the very heart of the core's power. Pain exploded through her body, every cell, every fiber of her being screamed in agony as the energy coursed through her. It felt like her very soul was being torn apart, reassembled, and then ripped apart again. But amid the overwhelming agony, there was something else, something brighter. A vision like a flash of light was before her. A field of stars, ancient and eternal, stretching into infinity. You are the Guardian, the last line of defense. Stand firm, Lyra. The voice in her mind grew distant as her mind began to fracture under the weight of the core's power. The stars before her began to fade, replaced by the image of a massive, writhing darkness, something vast and terrifying, moving through the void, consuming everything in its path. The Voidborn. She could see their true form now, like shadows of death, untouchable and unstoppable. But now, Lyra held the power to fight back. The decision had been made. Now, it was time to finish it. The pain that had consumed her body began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of clarity and power. Lyra's vision sharpened, as if she were seeing the universe through a new lens. She could feel the raw energy of the core coursing through her, a force so ancient and vast that it defied comprehension. The stars she had seen, the endless expanse of space, were now within her reach, not as distant pinpricks of light, but as something she could touch, control, and manipulate. Her body trembled, not from pain anymore, but from the overwhelming surge of power that thrummed through her every nerve. The core had transformed her, had fused her with something greater than herself. She wasn't just a human anymore. She was a conduit of the universe's raw energy, a vessel for the force that had been dormant for millennia. Guardian, you have awakened the power of the core. But remember, with this power comes responsibility. You are the last line of defense. The Voidborn must not pass. Lyra's breath hitched as she felt the presence of the Voidborn in her mind, as if their malevolent shadows were watching, waiting. She could feel their cold, calculating hunger. They were closing in, drawn to the power that now surged within her. The very fabric of space seemed to ripple with their approach. They will stop at nothing to claim the refuge, to consume everything in their path. But you, Guardian, can stop them. The words echoed in her mind, but they were no longer just a message. They were a call to action. The power of the core, the ancient energy, was now hers to command. She could feel the potential of it, a force so immense that it could obliterate entire fleets with a thought. But the question lingered, could she control it? You have to do this, Lyra. Torrhen's voice broke through her thoughts, grounding her back to reality. She turned to find him standing just behind her, his face pale but determined. The Voidborn are here. We don't have much time. Lyra nodded, swallowing hard. She could see the faint outline of the Vicari ships on the horizon, their enormous forms descending rapidly toward the refuge. The ground trembled beneath them, a sign of the impending assault. Her mind screamed with the weight of the responsibility she had taken on. The fate of humanity now rested entirely on her shoulders. "Help me," she said to Torrhen, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can feel them. The Voidborn. They're coming, and they're stronger than anything we faced before." Torrhen didn't hesitate. He stepped closer, gripping her arm. "We're with you, Lyra. We'll fight until the end." Lyra took a deep breath, steadying herself. There was no turning back now. She reached out with her mind, connecting to the core's energy, feeling its pulse reverberating through her. She focused, honing in on the approaching enemy fleet. It was strange. She could almost see them, their shadows stretching across space, each movement sharp and calculated. They were closing in on the refuge with terrifying precision. The power she had unlocked within herself began to coalesce, swirling around her like an unseen force. Tendrils of energy reached out, forming barriers of shimmering light that began to push back against the darkness of the Voidborn. Lyra concentrated harder, and the barriers expanded, growing in strength and density. She could feel the strain, the weight of controlling such power, but she refused to falter. Suddenly, the Voidborn's presence grew more distinct in her mind. Their intentions were clear. They intended to breach the refuge's defenses and destroy everything in their path. But Lyra wasn't going to let that happen. With a fierce scream, she thrust her hand forward, and a blinding pulse of energy erupted from the core, shooting outward in a massive shockwave. The energy hit the Voidborn forces like a tidal wave, sending ripples through space as it collided with the alien fleet. Ships groaned under the force, their shields flickering as they absorbed the blow. But Lyra could feel their resilience, their determination to push through. The Voidborn retaliated almost immediately, dark tendrils of energy lashing out in every direction. The ground beneath Lyra's feet cracked and splintered, and the sky overhead rippled with violent distortion. The battle had begun in earnest. "Stay strong, Lyra," Torrhen called, his voice barely audible over the storm of energy swirling around them. "You've got this." The words gave her strength, a reminder that she wasn't alone in this fight. Torrhen and the others were still here, still willing to stand by her side. She had no choice but to succeed. The power of the core was immense, but it was also unstable. Every blast of energy she sent out drained her, leaving her feeling weaker, more vulnerable, but she couldn't stop. The Voidborn were relentless, and if she faltered, they would tear the refuge apart. "Focus, Lyra," she whispered to herself, gathering every last ounce of willpower. "You're the Guardian. You are the last hope." With a final surge of strength, she channeled the core's energy into a single focused blast. The blast shot forward, a brilliant beam of light that cut through the Voidborn's forces like a blade through flesh. The ships screamed in protest, their shields disintegrating under the intensity of the attack. But the battle was far from over. the Voidborn would return, stronger than before. Lyra steadied herself, her body trembling from the effort. This was just the beginning, and she would not let them win. Not now, not ever. Lyra's body burned with exhaustion, each breath a struggle as the energy from the core surged through her veins, refusing to let her rest. Her mind was teetering on the edge, stretched thin by the weight of the power she had summoned. The Voidborn were relentless, their dark energy swirling and crashing against the barriers she had created, each blow more forceful than the last. She stood at the epicenter of the battle, her hands outstretched, drawing from the core's infinite power as if it were a lifeline. The pulse of energy she had unleashed had scattered the Voidborn fleet for a moment, but they were already regrouping, their movements precise and coordinated. The dark forces were relentless, and Lyra knew the fight was far from over. "Hold them off, Lyra." Torrhen's voice rang out, cutting through the cacophony of battle. She glanced toward him. He was crouched behind a shielded barrier, the remnants of his squad providing cover. His eyes met hers, a mixture of fear and determination. They were all in this together, and he knew she couldn't do it alone. But the truth was, no matter how much power she wielded, Lyra was alone. The core had made it clear she was the last line of defense. Humanity's fate rested entirely on her shoulders, and as the Voidborn's forces swarmed in again, the weight of that responsibility threatened to crush her. The core hummed louder, as though sensing her wavering resolve. It spoke again, but this time, its voice was more insistent, more urgent. "You are the guardian, Lyra. Do not falter now. The final choice is yours. Continue the battle with your strength alone, or awaken the full power of the core. The cost will be great." Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. She had already given everything she could. But the thought of losing everything, the refuge, humanity, her comrades, pushed her forward. If she didn't act now, they would fall. The Voidborn would consume it all. "No," she whispered fiercely, more to herself than to the core. "I won't let them win." She closed her eyes and focused. The energy that had flooded her body now coiled inside her like a live wire, waiting to be released. The core's power thrummed louder, resonating with her thoughts, urging her to unlock the full potential of the ancient force within her. She felt the presence of the Voidborn closing in once more, their hunger palpable. With a sharp, decisive motion, Lyra stretched out her hands, palm up, towards the oncoming storm. She opened herself to the core completely, surrendering her body and mind to its will. "Release the light, Guardian, become the vessel." The words echoed through her mind just as the Voidborn's energy converged on her position, dark tendrils of destruction converging with terrifying speed. Lyra's body pulsed with light, brighter than the sun, as the core's raw power erupted from her in a tidal wave of energy. The entire refuge shook as the explosion of light and force consumed everything in its path. The Voidborn shrieked in fury as their forces were blasted back, their ships disintegrating in the intense light. The dark tendrils that had once lashed out with such precision faltered and collapsed under the immense energy. Lyra could feel the pull of the core's energy reaching its peak, threatening to overrun her fragile human form. She could feel it then, the cost. The core demanded a price, and the toll it took was almost unbearable. The world around her twisted and distorted as the light from her hands began to dim. She could no longer feel her body, her mind disintegrating under the weight of the energy she had unleashed. But even as her consciousness began to fade, she could hear the voices of her comrades. Torrhen's voice, calling out to her, full of relief. The feeling of their connection, the knowledge that they had succeeded, filled her with a quiet peace. The Voidborn were retreating, their forces scattered and broken. The refuge was safe, humanity had won. And as the final vestiges of the core's power faded, Lyra's vision blurred, her last thoughts clear. "I did it. We're safe." The light faded and Lyra collapsed to her knees, her body finally giving way to the toll of the battle. But she had done what was necessary. The last refuge had been protected. humanity would survive. The end.